So I am here with the co-owner of Tanninger Companies and also Tony Award winning Broadway producer, Ryan Tanner. How you doing today?
I'm well, thank you. How about yourself?
I'm excellent. Thank you so much for joining me. We have a mutual
Sure.
connection because we actually went to Illinois College. Like you were a couple years older than me because I was supposed to graduate in 2004. And
Yeah.
the funny thing is, like, I always assumed that you were like a legacy because of Tanner Hall. Like, you
I thought so too. Turns out I wasn't.
know, that's funny.
You know, crazy enough, my middle name, I have two middle names, but my first middle name is Edward. Of course, it was named after then President Edward Tanner. So, but zero correlation.
That's funny. And I was reading a little bit about your bio for the interview, and you've talked in the past about like growing up, like with a teen mom, and like
Sure.
she basically wasn't like equipped to be a mother. Like could you talk a little bit about that experience?
Sure. Well, I grew up in a little town called Quincy, Illinois, which isn't far from Jacksonville. And my mother, my the truth is my mother had been being raped by both her brother and her father. And the only way she could get them to take their hands off of her was to become pregnant. And so she got pregnant with me at 14 and had me at 15. And my father was black, my mother was white. And of course, my family being, partly Baptist, partly Catholic, of course, prior to her getting pregnant with me, were completely anti-abortion. But the moment they found out that she was having a biracial baby, they did everything in their power to convince her to move forward with abortion. She did not, partly because I think she knew if she did that, they would resume molesting her until she was able to leave the house.
Wow, that's some deep, issues. Like I feel like, like a lot of trauma and like, it's very common like in our community. Do you how did you get over like, that shame like growing up? Because I feel like, like a lot of those issues sometimes come with shame.
Well, as a for me personally, I since I was a little kid, I always talked with anyone who would listen. And I would say I started going to count. I went to my high school counselor a lot, and my junior high counselor. I went to Mrs. Lowenberg. I was in her office all the time, and so I talked to anybody who would listen. And if I wasn't in school and talking to a counselor, I was talking with our neighbors. And so I've always been very comfortable exhaling all of that for whatever reason. It really bothered both my mom and my grandmother a lot. They didn't like, of course, me sharing our business with other people, but I, subconsciously knew that I realized, I suppose, that I was getting a lot out of it by having, various forms of therapy.
That's incredible. I feel therapy is so important. And you overcame like, this trauma. And, a lot of people who experience trauma like this don't necessarily graduate from high school and definitely
Sure.
go on to college. Like, so uh can you talk a little bit about like, graduating from high school and then finding an interest in theater and then going on to college?
Sure. Well, I was the first to graduate from high school. My mom and father both had GEDs, but I'm first, and then of my brothers, I have three brothers on my mother's side. I was the first to, um, I was the last, first and last to graduate from Quincy Senior High School, and I had terrible grades. I'm I I was diagnosed with learning disability later on in college, but school was very, very hard for me, and I was bullied a lot. I was chubby, I was feminine, and I was biracial, and I was never too white, or was never white enough, rather, and I was never black enough. So I was caught in the middle. And by that time, about the age of 12, my mother became very physically abusive. She started drinking, I would say, when I was 10. And so I just did not, it was happening at school and at home. My mom bullied me significantly. And I remember telling so I graduated high school barely. I think if if you needed 97 credit hours, I had 97 credit hours. Barely graduated. I think you had to attend schools. You could only miss like 40% of school and still graduate. I missed 40% of school. And during that time, I became very addicted to food. And I got, as I said, I got pretty chubby and pretty heavy. And when I graduated high school, I went to my high school teacher, music teacher, which really I kind of grew up in this what's called A building in Quincy, Illinois, QHS, a very legendary music department, certainly within the state, but in the country's accolades for decades. So I had a safe place and teachers who cared a great deal about me. And of course, that's kind of where the theater part kicks in. She's like, Ryan, you're no college is going to accept you. You're going to have to stay here. You have to go to John Wood Community College. And I thought she'd lost her mind. And like, clearly I could make the case to some university, some four-year college out there that would take me. And I could not. Sometimes when I travel and I do a lot of speeches with young people, I bring all my letters of rejection. And I've got Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Duke. I've always had big dreams, but they were all a no, including Quincy University, where I grew up, and then also Illinois College in Jacksonville. And started. So I finally realized I was going to have to take. I kept, getting letter after letter after letter. I drove over to. I don't know if you remember him. His name was Gail Vaughn. Gail Vaughn was he was in the admissions department, and I have my file. I got my file from Illinois College, and in it, it's got all of my letters. It also has all of the post-it notes from. Do you remember Mary Jane Million? And so the post-it note will say Ryan Tanner is here again. 2 days later, Ryan Tanner has called twice today. He's wondering why you haven't called him back. Ryan Tanner called to let me know that he's on his way over to talk to you. I was super persistent. I just felt like if I could just get one shot, I could get in. And no, it was no every time. So I went to John Wood Community College. I started in 97. I graduated, from QHS in May of 97. Registered and signed up for classes, obviously, fall of 97 at John Wood. And I think 2 weeks into it, my mother attempted suicide. Really, really. My mother had tried before, but never like this. This was not a cry for help. This was I'm out. And so I left to take care of my three brothers. I stopped school because I had a job at Applebee's, stopped school to take care of them, and then reapplied for the spring of 1998. And in between her suicide attempt and when I applied, I kept reaching out to Gail Vaughn. Finally, he said, if you go to John Wood, and you take 3 classes, so 9 hours, if you can just get C's, we will accept you on academic probation. So I did that. It was very hard for me. School, books, reading has always been very challenging. I just didn't, I remember in the 3rd grade, they wanted to hold me back. And my mom said no. And then in the 4th grade, they wanted to hold me back. And then in the 5th grade. So I just, I was very out the gate behind, academically speaking. And so barely got those 9 credits, but Gavon kept his word and started college. I was real straight and narrow in high school. I had no friends, never went to prom, never spent the night at people's homes. I never did drugs, never had a cigarette, nothing. I mean, just boom. Got to college, and all of a sudden I realized I could be fat and funny to make friends because I was painfully shy. And so I just continued to eat and drink. I started drinking. My mother was an alcoholic, but I started drinking. And I think that that semester I got a 1.8. So the school said, you can start the spring semester, but if you come back, if you don't get it to a 2, you're out. So spring semester, I got it to a 2.0 barely. I'm 340 pounds. This is not working. And so I went home that summer, and I was bulimic for 90 days. My mom spent her whole life sticking her finger down her throat to throw up, but I was just so addicted to food. And when you weigh that much, it's really difficult to celebrate 5 pounds, right? I mean, we're supposed to, but it's hard. And so I spent that summer sticking my finger down my throat. And then one day I learned that it caused your teeth to go yellow. I was like, my teeth are my moneymaker. My smile is what it counts. So I dropped that like a hot potato, thank God. But I did lose 60 pounds during those 90 days. But when you weigh, 340 and you lose 60 pounds, you still weigh 280 pounds. So, but I went back to school and started sophomore semester, happier with myself, more confident with myself, and more sure of. During that first year at Illinois College, I forgot the blessing I had received, the lesson, which was this acceptance. It was my only shot, and I was fucking it up. So I came back, and I had a professor by the name of Karen Dean. I don't know if you knew her. Yeah, but she taught me. I flunked with her, and but I was really I had a gravitational pull towards her too, and she just had a real frank conversation with me one day. It's like, you need to get your shit together or get out because you're wasting my time. That's exactly how it went down. And so I just came back, and I made new friends. I started hanging out with smart kids, not the people. I was drinking like a 12 pack, sometimes a case of Natty Light or the Milk Walk or the Beast, and I just came back knowing that I had to make some changes. And that sophomore year, I ran for student forum representative, won that. I retook all the classes that I flunked. Um, I committed to the Learning Center. I don't know if that was there when you were there, but was constantly in there, and the Writing Center. And then eventually, Dr. Sidney Cochran hired me to be a consultant in there because I loved editing. I still do today. I love to write, but more than anything, I love to edit. It's like I can get caught in 3 sentences for an hour, and I've just always been that way. And so I just all of a sudden I had all these things aligning, and in part large part because of Cara Dean. And so after that, every year just continued to get better and better and better. And I got to travel the world with Karen Dean. We went to England, Ireland, and Wales. We did a civil rights tour through the South, and I just I began to see that okay, I actually can have the life that I want, but it's just going to be harder for me. And I during my senior year of college, I was finally diagnosed with a learning disability, which is I had a very low. Um, you have two IQs that make up your general IQ, but I had a very low. I was at a handicap level for my organizational IQ, and above on the opposite side, tested outside of normal verbally. And so between the two, I still had a fairly low IQ, but the organizational IQ really hampered how and why it was hard for me to assemble information, particularly when it was new. So I, school was always really hard, and even though I'd had a great 4 years, you needed 120 credit hours. I had I had 120 credit hours. I did have a 3.08 or something like that. And I was president of the senior body because my goal when I came back that my sophomore year, my goal was I was going to address the student body at our graduation. I didn't tell that to anyone, but that was in my heart. And, I graduated. I got a fellowship working for then Governor Ryan. I stayed on for Governor Blagojevich. As you know, both of them went to prison. I was like, I'm out of here. And so I did a year and a half with them. I went to a I did not always wanted to be a lawyer. Actually, I really always wanted to fight for justice. And and an alumni got me accepted into St. Louis University's. Um, it was two classes for the summer for people who did not really qualify, but it was to see how you did in those two classes. You had to get an 80% to be accepted permanently into St. Louis School of Law. And I was just coming out. So imagine being in St. Louis, boy from Quincy, Illinois, just coming out. The last thing on my mind, kind of again like my freshman year, was academics. So I ended up getting a 79 on those two courses. So I failed because you needed an 80. And I thought my life was over. I was so embarrassed because everyone that knew me, from my kindergarten teacher up through all of my professors and friends, all knew that I wanted to go to law school. So failed out of that summer retreat. And friend gave me a job, and I started doing that, and that was in healthcare. And that's what kind of started my healthcare career. Was a friend gave me a great opportunity. Really, really hard job, making no money. I mean, no, like $25,000 a year. Like, just, not for someone who has an undergraduate degree, but had worked. I made more money working for the governor than I did in this new job, but that's what it was. And so I started that, and from there, everything else is just kind of, they say, be ready when the luck happens. And I think I know it's obviously, of course, I've always tried harder than I think other people. I'm not someone who gives up easily, if ever. So all of those things combined have really led to getting to have the pretty remarkable life that no one ever believed I'd have.
Yeah, you absolutely do have an amazing life. I was looking at your Instagram. I was really impressed. And uh when did you start Tanager companies? And why does it focus on so many different areas? Like, can you talk a
Yeah.
little bit about?
Well, one thing is we started toying with the idea of the brand Tanninger because it's the last part of it's the last four letters. It's the first four letters of my last name, last five letters of my husband's last name. And we started toying with this idea and we started Tanninger. We started our first company, IQ Surgical, in 2007. That was solely in orthopedic reconstructive procedures, hip, knee, and spine, and started there. And then from there, we started Square One Theatrics in 2013 for our first show, which was Pippin. And then we had an opportunity to start another company in healthcare specializing in epilepsy diagnosis. So we're a remote telemedicine company that diagnoses patients in their homes as opposed to having to go to the hospital. All of a sudden, we just realized that we had been toying with this idea Tanninger, and we had all these various interests. We didn't want to leave healthcare because it's been so intellectually and financially rewarding to us. But Jay really his love of theater was stronger and more than mine. Both his undergraduate and masters are in music theater opera, and so he he just decided, he's like, I'm very grateful for our healthcare career, but we're gonna have to I've got to get back into theater somehow. And so that's how we started with, at that time, Square One Theatrics. But all of a sudden we had all these companies, two in healthcare, one in entertainment. Then we had a commercial and residential development firm that we had started here in Tulsa. And so what we did was we just launched the brand Tanninger Companies that would then have, which would be the parent company across various sectors. So healthcare, entertainment, we're now in hospitality, uh, commercial and residential development, and e-commerce. We started in 2020. We launched a men's apparel line called THK, and we probably like to work more than anyone we've ever met. We just, and I think maybe because we're married, we're always around each other, so it's easy to talk work. We love it. We like it a lot. We like building things. We love investing in people and watching them grow. And whether you're talking about a restaurant that we own, or we've got 5 casts running around the world, you know, we like building things. That's really probably at the heart of what we do.
You talked earlier about like, having like, poor organization skills, like, and now like, how do you feel like you've grown in that area? And then also like having a partner, I'm sure like, helps a little bit, like, in that area, like, do you guys feel like you keep each other on track? And,
Yeah,
what have you learned about like organization and balance, like, since your time at Illinois College, I guess?
sure. Well, we both have figured out what our strengths are. So, for example, he's over all finance. I was never good with hard sciences at all. And so he oversees all of those. I oversee HR, and I serve as project manager on all the various projects, whether it's for example, we're renovating a building in Quincy right now and converting it to a hotel. So I serve as the project manager over all of these, and then he is more operational. Like he gets it down. I'm more on the strategy side, and so I'm kind of like I'm a little bit Rain Man when it comes to strategy. I'm really fortunate that I see things easily from a strategic point of view that probably most people don't have. Now I have, like I said, I'm terrible at lots of other things, but just that part, strategy and understanding it and putting all those pieces together, which is weird because I was really struggling with organization, happens naturally. But it's when you give me, an actual puzzle that I have to organize, terrible, terrible.
And how do you guys pick these projects? Because, it's really interesting, like some of the work you do, like past projects include, like The Waitress and then Pippin. Can you talk a little bit about just like your work on Broadway and then what
For sure.
draws you guys to be producers on Broadway projects?
Well, our initial draw came from Jay. I was perfectly content staying in uh, healthcare, commercial and residential development, hospitality. I knew nothing about entertainment at all. I mean, he knows obviously quite a bit, but for me, the part about producing that I love is creating and forging the relationships that we have with various production partners around the world. And I love the process of finding projects. It's a really cool when, I get scripts all the time. And it's a really neat, it's a privilege when someone sends you their work and trusts you with it, and you're able to have a conversation of, I think, you have all these things that need to be worked on before we would consider, or you're really close, or I think we'd like to do this. And I like seeing that other person light up. That's really an extraordinary moment. The other part of it that I love so much is I get all of these, to our office. I get so many handwritten notes of how one of our shows has impacted them, or my Facebook Messenger, the messages that come in, or Instagram, people you know, who reach out to say thank you, or, I didn't understand this part of that character. I'm still really very much of the people, not above the people. So, I like that exchange. And so, to me, that's the best part of this. We pick shows. We really kind of have three criteria. One is the show designed for a general audience? So take Pippin. Pippin is universal. There's nothing in it that's so specific. We're not, for example, right now we're looking at a show based on the film Saturday Night Church, which tells a story of a transgender individual, and who's growing up at church, and what that process looks like. Well, compare Pippin to this particular story. It's like Pippin had, didn't matter your age, gender, that's for everyone. Well, the show, now personally, I really want to do this particular project, but we haven't made a determination yet if we will, because it's not meant for, it's a general, a family of four from Phoenix going to New York probably won't go see it. So you're ruling out a huge part of the audience. And so we generally, if we were to do this, it would be an outside of the norm project for us. I think it's important and timely, but who knows if we'll do it. But it has to be meant for a general audience. Do we just like it? Sometimes there's a general audience piece that we just hate. And then thirdly, what do the numbers look like? Can we get our investors capital plus profit back? And that's our criteria. So all three of those are really important. We have the times where we have missed the mark is where we either didn't think about the general audience, which leads to the recoupment. If we don't really pay attention on those three factors, we get thrown off. We're very fortunate. We've had 25 shows throughout the world from day one. That includes US tours, London, Australia, China. And of those productions, we've only had one US failure. And
That's
then
incredible.
if the odds in Broadway right now of recoupment are at 18%. We are at, like, our firm is like 93 or 94% recoupment plus profit. So we've been really fortunate. We've had a couple partially recouped shows, unfortunately, during the pandemic in London.
Most definitely. And you talked earlier about, like, having a commitment to social justice, which is why you wanted to go to law school. And I thought it was really interesting, like, that you still, though, like, have that same commitment. You're on the board of three nonprofits, Tulsa Cares, which delivers social services to those living with HIV and AIDS, the Philbrook Museum of Art, and then the John Hope Franklin Center for Reconciliation. Can you just talk about your commitment in social justice?
Well, I think I grew up receiving every social service out there. I was a ward of the court. I was my I benefited from the Quincy Adams County Regional United Way. Uh, Certainly, neighborhood kids' parents took me to church, took me to school, um, taught me how to tie a tie, fed me. I mean, I just, I am I have been I survived on the goodness and kindness of other people my whole life, and so when I got to a spot, well, I've always volunteered. Even in junior high, I volunteered at the Humane Society. In college, I volunteered for an at-risk program for um, K through K through 3, I think. Anyway, so I've always believed in volunteerism as kind of being at my core, but then specific with a specific interest on women in poverty, obviously the gay community, and of course now being in Tulsa, and having learned about the Tulsa race massacre. All of those things have really compelled me to be active, listening, and I'm fortunate because I work for myself, so you know I can be on these boards, and and I'm financially in a position where I can make contributions that are life changing, and that's what people did for me. So it was just or kind of organically made sense to be a part of um, being a change maker.
Most definitely. One of the things I really loved about Illinois College was like they had a commitment to service, like
Sure.
especially like during the time like we went there, like I felt like, it was like it was all about service. I really enjoy like the convocations. Um, what would you say like, was the biggest thing that you took out of like, going to Illinois College and and the experience of college?
Sure. Well, the most important thing that I got out of Ellen College is what I still have today, and that's I'm very close with Karen Dean. We talk every day. Um, she's been to New York with me. Before she retired, I went back and did several of those civil rights tours that I did with her with new students. And so, of course, the education was incredible, but, she has been a major part of my life, and a part of every decision, I would say, since I was a sophomore uh, at Illinois College. And then I think as a whole from college, I grew up a whole lot, and I learned in college that really it didn't matter what your story was. I mean, you saw that and how difficult it was. No one cared about my sob life of why I had poor grades. All they knew was academically you just weren't going to make. You didn't have the numbers that equal or predict success, right? And so I learned there that I had to really. It was about the work, and that has continued throughout my life today. I mean, it is really truly, it is only about the work.
That's incredible, Ryan. And I really enjoyed you. Thank you so much for taking the time and like, talking with me. And it was really a pleasure. And tell Karen Dean I said hi. Like, I don't know if she remembers me. I never had her for class, but I remember her very vividly. Just like, during orientations, like when we came in. And then like being a political science major, I salute you because I know that was a tough major. I took Dr. Wells once. I was like, I thought I was gonna major in political science. I was like, no, I ended up majoring.
He's still there.
Is he really? Wow.
He's still there, and no matter what, he would never give me higher than an 87.
Yeah.
No matter what, the whole 4 years.
He was
The
tough.
whole
I ended up majoring in history, and I enjoyed those classes. They were
so
little less
that's
tough than political science. I thought political science was really, really tough, some of those classes.
Well, Karen Dean, whew,
I I've heard, yeah.
yeah, she was legendary. I mean, so thought provoking. So she was always so prepared. High expectations. Huge emphasis on social justice, and all bit. Although very much a Democrat, there are lots of people, and she has lots of students today that are right of center that she's very, very close with. And so sometimes people said that she mistreated you if you were a Republican, which really wasn't the case. I think she's probably harder on Democrats, if anything.
That's
you know,
awesome. Like, you what's it like now? Like, going back and like, sharing your stories, like, having been in that seat of someone who was looking for, mentorship or good advice. And what do you feel like, would be a party message that you would leave people?
oh my gosh, it has been extraordinary because so many of these young kids, or if they're in college, these adults are so still trying to find their way. So often, most of them feel unseen and unheard, not relevant. And I always encourage people. Of course, you again working the work you have to earn a living, but even if you, I was thinking about this yesterday. Even if you work at McDonald's, right? You still need to have a component of your life where you're giving back to your community. If you are not actively engaged in something larger than yourself, I don't see how your life is fulfilling.
Most
That,
definitely.
that's really how I move through the space that I'm in, and I just firmly believe that to my core.
Definitely. Congratulations to you, Ryan, with all your success. You definitely deserve it, man. I really enjoyed having this conversation with you. And
Me too.
I hope to connect with you again in the future. I really appreciate you. Have your husband on next time. Thank you.
Yeah, we would be delighted. You have Melissa's contact, so
Yeah,
just CC her on it. And sorry, I was running a little late.
it's all good. Thank you.
I
Thank you. I
apologize.
appreciate you. You have a great one.
You too. Thank you. Bye.